Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the History Geeks. Hi, Jane. How
Hi,
are
Andrew.
you?
Good to see you.
You too, you too. And it's absolutely fantastic to be back because today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite films of all time, Casablanca. For those of you who might not be familiar with this film, it is a classic. I won't say it's a classic from my youth because that would be a lie. It is a 1943 film, which is set in North Africa, and it has some very big names in it. It's led by Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, Paul Henreid, all the names that will resonate with people who love their Hollywood greats. I realize again, Hollywood greats from a distant past, but nonetheless an important classic. Jane, as before this, had you watched the film?
I had a long time ago, and it's peculiar when you're watching something that's always a classic. It's like epic. This is the golden age of Hollywood. And because you kind of know the quotes, and then you realize some of them are actually misquoted along the way because some of them didn't actually turn up in the film. But it's kind of one of those things where you feel I have to like this movie because it's a classic. So I kind of have to love it, or else there's something wrong with me. And then you watch it and you realize it's actually a really, really good movie. It's an epic piece of filmmaking, this one.
Yeah, and I know what you mean about the quotes because I grew up with people around me saying, "Here's looking at you, kid," which is, of course, Bogart's classic line as Rick. And it was only years later that I realized where that came from, or actually quite what they meant by that. But
That's true.
yeah.
And I remember play it again, Sam. And the line play it, Sam is in there, but play it again actually never turns up. But people used to say that. And that's what happens when you got a movie that's so well known and just moves on from generation to generation. But that's a wonderful thing about movie making. But actually, this wasn't a film script. First, it was a theater play called Everybody Goes to Rick's. And
Yes.
it turned into this Casablanca film script. And I think another thing that really stunned me a little bit was when I realized it came out in you said 43, right, Andrew? Uh,
Yeah.
that was during the war. This
Yeah.
was in the middle of all of this happening, which makes it even more extraordinary, actually.
Yes, my grandparents saw this film when they were still a courting couple in the mid-war period, and I find there's so much in it that's really fascinating because so many of the war films of that era are really quite gung-ho heroic allies storming in and slapping the silly Hun and what have you. For me, what really sets Casablanca apart is actually there's none of that, physical macho type heroics. Very little gunfire is actually exchanged. And I think you only, by my count, only a couple of people actually die in the film. It's a very civilized film for a war
Yes.
film. Um, and it's very much, I don't know if you had this sense of it, it's very much a lovely story about the triumph of really quite ordinary people over a great evil that's threatening the world. Now, in a way, it's that kind of story where it doesn't have to be Nazism as it is in the film, but that was the most relevant existential threat at the time. But when I look at the characters, even people like Rick, who's the main character, who's quite the adventurer, and then you get Victor Laszlo, the
Yeah.
resistance guy, who's not actually a violent man in himself, but he's the propagandist par excellence, and he does his job so well that the Nazis are desperate to get him. It's people who could be you and me, and that's such a wonderful message in this film.
That is so true. And I think what they captured brilliantly is that melting pot that Casablanca was, because this was not a place people came to stay. This was a place where you moved on to somewhere else, and usually to America via Lisbon. And I think they actually captured that brilliantly in that show of different nationalities, different cultures, different languages being spoken, but also people in so many different situations. There were people who could pay for the right
Yeah.
papers and documents. There were people like that it's such a brilliant scene, that young couple where the man is sitting in the casino trying to win enough money. It
Yes.
so captures, that horrible situation and trap a lot of people were in.
Mm.
And I think that bit of the story is told so brilliantly. With
Yes.
the sort of the main plot revolves around these letters of transit, as they're called in the film. There weren't actually such a thing. There were like exit visas and other bits of documents, but the principle of it was very accurate. And there are these characters coming in from time to time, not necessarily for a very long time. They're very short, brief cameos, but my
Mm.
God, they tell a very, very telling and sometimes poignant story.
Yes, I'm really glad you mentioned the young Bulgarian couple, because you never really get to know them that well, but you get to know them just well enough to know how desperate they are. There's that really heartrending bit where, and of course, it being the 1940s, the film skips very delicately around the fact that the Louis, the prefect of police, is somewhat abusing his position with charming young ladies in return for exit visas, whether they're married or not. And it just spoke to me about the level of desperation that, you would do anything to get out of this situation, even though you know what the consequences and the emotional fallout is probably going to be. And although the film injects just enough good humor and jollity to counterbalance that, it is really sad. Of course, you get the lovely happy ones too. Do you remember the sweet German couple who are about to head
Oh
off to America?
yes, they were
The ones with
practicing.
the slightly iffy
They were
English.
practicing English. Yes, yes, but that tells a story as well in all of this. And I do remember that was. I think there's a scene where they sit in Rick's and they're talking. They're sitting at a table. That was the first time also I noticed that brilliant use of the spotlight from the surveillance camera from I think it's the watchtower at the airport or something.
Yes.
That sort of everyone is being watched all the time, and you have that panorama over his the entrance to his establishments there, and that light is sort of that spotlight is sort of moving around all the time, watching everyone all the time. And then you have this couple sitting there, and you know that you never really know who to trust. You don't know who you can talk to. There's a lot of negotiating going on around the tables. There's a lot of, "Ooh, could I see that ring again?" Or, there's a lot of that kind of thing going on all the time in what seems to be this facade of people just hanging out, having a good time on a, I don't know, Saturday evening or something, having a couple
Yeah.
of drinks, that kind of thing. So there's this hidden layer all the time going on. And I think that couple as well sort of really captured the spirit of what is going on around them all the time.
Yes. Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, there's the other thing I like, where when we talked about the bit part characters, is how none of them ever feel quite the same, because it would
Yeah,
be so easy to cut and paste,
yeah,
even in that era of Hollywood filmmaking. Actually, perhaps especially in that era of Hollywood filmmaking, but there's a nice level of thought that's gone into everyone just to make them. And even on Rick's staff, I mean,
yeah.
Sasha, the crazy enthusiastic Russian, he probably gets less than 10 lines in the
Yeah.
film, but he establishes himself so well.
That is true.
And
That is true. And at the same time, I also wanted your view on that, Andrew, because I mean, this is Vichy occupied Morocco, but that you do get such a sense, I mean, especially between the main characters, of the political tension and the complexities of that situation through
yes,
the way they are and the way yeah, you have the slightly corrupt Frenchman there, but the entire sort of play between them and the tension between them all the time, because you kind
yeah,
of always have to make sure everyone is happy around you. So there's a constant dance, a balance there of, not making anyone angry and at the same time not being too compliant or pleasing someone too much.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the character of Louis, he has a very, very interesting job because, and I remember there's one particularly tense scene where they have to break up a fight between a Frenchman and one of the German officers, and Major Strasser complains about this and says, I don't, perhaps some of you forget where your loyalties lie, and Louis quite reasonably says, well, we are allies by necessity, but we cannot regulate the feelings of our people. And
No, that's a really good point. That's a fantastic.
yeah, and it all comes to a head in that what I regard as possibly the most beautiful scene in the entire film, where everyone sings the Marseillaise in
Yes,
Rix, and
yes, that is fantastic. That scene,
yeah,
that is
that
fantastic.
that scene has an energy to
Yeah.
it which has lasted really well. Now, I tried to find out how true this was, but I was once told that a lot of the extras in that scene were genuine refugees who had fled Nazi-occupied Europe, and the reason that they were brought in, apparently, was that they wanted this real emotion when they do this amazing show of defiance.
Yes.
And I mean, I could certainly believe it's true because that
Yeah.
scene has something about it which you don't really get, even in a very well acted scene, that you pick up on the vibe and the feeling. And
There is a very different feel to that scene from all. I mean, as beautifully acted and directed all the other scenes are, there is a very different feel to that scene, and there is a almost non-apologetic nationalism shining through in everything from the German, part as well. But it's very rare, I think, obviously back then, but also nowadays in filmmaking, to let that part, unless it serves a specific purpose, but it's very rare to let it be that obvious and shining through in such a way. You can just feel the tension, the emotion. That young girl, you can almost see her fighting back tears as she gets up and she sings the Marseillaise. It's a fantastic piece of filmmaking, that scene.
yeah, and I think it was just very satisfying for audiences in 1943 to see a group of Nazis
So
sort of
true.
outsung.
Being beaten in a contest of national anthems. Yes, yes. But you're right. That's just complete. I mean, it makes sense what you say, because there's such a different feel to that scene, and also the fact that a character like Rick, cool as he is, kind of stands back. He's
Yes.
he's nodding along to, yes, play the Marseillaise, but he's not participating. He's kind of standing there letting it happen.
Yes, the Rick in the film is a very complicated character, and I like it, and I like how the story teases out his background with Ilsa, and how you see his sort of fall from open idealism into a kind of terrible cynicism. I do love that first meeting when Major Strasser and his party first come into Rick's, and there's this very uncomfortable, almost interrogation. Let's meet the manager, but Rick is not having any of it, but he's still refusing to commit. And what is your citizenship? I'm a drunkard.
Yes. And that's another thing it does really well, this movie. It balances that seriousness and the humor.
Yeah.
That's another brilliant, funny scene. I actually laughed out loud. I remember the first time I watched that, where he's shutting down the establishment, and Rick goes, "On what ground? Why are you doing this?" And he go, "I've just discovered gambling is taking place." And then a waiter comes over. "You're winning, sir. Thank you very much."
Yes, that's brilliant.
That's a fantastic. You just go, "Oh yeah, okay, right. Who's serving who here?" Yeah. But there's that balance between the seriousness of it all and the humor is fantastic
Yeah.
as well. And it's balanced really, really beautifully, because you never get too much of either. You sort of get enough to understand the situation and to understand the tensity between the characters there.
Yes, yes, and it's wonderfully scattered throughout the film. I love the little pickpocket who's keeps popping up, going, "Look out, vultures in this city, vultures everywhere. Make sure you keep a hand on your wallet," as he lifts it.
Yes, that's fantastic as well. And then I gotta say, I mean, obviously this movie is done in black and white, which kind of makes it more intense in a way, because the play between shadow and light, that was, I remember that very, very clearly the first time I watched it. That was fantastic. Every single time there's a lovers meeting, the light goes down a little bit.
Yeah.
Every time the tensity comes up, there's either that spotlight from the watchtower or something happening. And I think the most beautiful scene, actually, in when it comes to directing, the one I keep returning to is the one where Rick is, after he's met Ilsa again, and he's sitting there at his bar. Sam is playing behind him. He's just delivered that line. She walks into wine, and he's sort of looking either into the bar or sort of down into the table in front of him, and the camera slowly moves in on his face. And you know there's a flashback coming, but he really tries to resist it. And then the camera stops just for a second or two. It stops that movement, just in sort of an attempt to say, okay, I don't want to go there. He really doesn't want to go there. I don't want to go back there, but of course he has to. And the camera starts moving again, and it gets closer and closer to his face. And then you have the flashback to Paris. And I just thought, when I first noticed that, why is that scene so intense? Is it because of his acting? Is it because of the music? What's happening there? And then I noticed that little trick with the camera, that where you so follow his thoughts. You know, you can see he doesn't want to go back there. No, she just walked into mine, and he's really angry. He's slightly drunk. And then, of course, he cannot resist that flashback. It is coming. Was so with him in that scene. And I thought, goodness, I never actually thought the directing in this was, you know, something that was so noticeable. But it's a brilliantly directed film. The direction itself is like a piece of storytelling.
Yeah, and do you know, it's funny you mentioned that, because for someone who's watched the film a lot, I'd never picked up consciously on that camera moment, but I'd picked up on the feeling that there's a man who does not want to revisit this moment, and that sort of neutral Rick that you were talking about, you know, the world-weary, I don't give a damn Rick, who he's carefully built up as a kind of defense against his loss. You feel all of that, and yet, do you know what? Next time I watch it, I'm going to keep an eye out for that, because you're right. It's so good because it registers, it triggers the right reaction with the audience, but it's so subtle it doesn't take over.
There are some brilliant sort of plays around, light and shadow in that as well. And I think that's what you can do in black and white.
Yes,
that it just becomes more almost intimate. Because the sort of the characteristics of your face and everything just becomes, I don't know, maybe more vivid when there isn't colors to disrupt it or to disturb the picture.
I think you're right, because I've always found emotions on actors' faces easier to read when they're in black and white than when they're in color. And color injects a certain amount of noise, as a visual noise, which you don't really need when you're trying to get this sense of people.
That's true.
Yeah,
that is true. And then we got to comment on the manuscript as well, because there's so many brilliant lines. And I think the one thing that Rick never says, because she tells him a lot of the time, many times, that she loves him and she still loves him. He never says that to her. You get a couple of times the "here's looking at you, kid" line, and that is so brilliant for his character, that line. I know it's a bit of a cliche, because that line is kind of maybe the most famous in any kind of movie ever, but it's so brilliant for his character.
Yes, and it does indeed work very well for Rick, and it's and yes, I've often wondered at that, because he obviously feels very deeply for her still, But I wonder if even earlier than he lets on in the movie, he's recognizing that in the end she must go with Victor Laszlo and not with him. Um, and I wonder how much he's kind of, I don't know how Bergman and Bogart decided they were going to sort of play this tension. I did watch a documentary where they interviewed one of Ingrid Bergman's children, and she said her mother often used to be congratulated so often about her role in Casablanca because she comes across with this marvelous display of barely controlled emotional stress
Yeah.
and kind of emotional trauma. And also she pulls off this amazing uncertainty about which of the two men she's going to end up with at the end of the film. But she shed some light on how her mother did it. And apparently some of the stress you see when she's acting is real, but it's for a different reason. Apparently, she was deeply concerned about whether she would land a role in the film For Whom the Bell Tolls. And
Oh,
so in between takes of Casablanca, she was always often rushing off to phone up the producers of that film to see if she'd landed the role. And she was really worrying about it. And apparently she channeled some of that stress and the worry into the acting. And the other thing with the balance between Rick and Victor was they were still finalizing the script when they
yes.
shot a lot of her scenes.
Yeah.
And apparently when she asked the director, who am I going to end up with? He said, I don't know, play it down the middle.
That is actually, I read about that as well. And I'm wondering if that's not part of her performance, because there is that doubt in her constantly. And of course,
Yeah.
that's what she's meant to instill in the audience. But you do actually sense that, maybe she doesn't really know.
No, but
And I
which is so
read somewhere,
marvelous.
is this true? I don't know. I read somewhere that even that last scene in the airport, that wasn't actually finalized until they started shooting it.
No.
Oh my goodness me. That must have been tense.
Yes, I think so, and actually, to be fair to her, it's an extremely tough decision. I mean, lady's choice. You've got Bogart's Rick on one side, and you've got Henry's Victor Laszlo on the other. You've got both very strong, attractive men in their different ways.
Yep.
Rick's perhaps more of the man of action, but then that's not to say Laszlo's not physically brave either, because you keep hearing all these
Yeah,
stories about how he survived concentration
yeah,
camps.
true.
So Rick perhaps is more of no, I won't say an adventurer. There's you hear about Rick running guns to the
Yeah,
Ethiopians and the Spanish Republicans, which is one side of the coin, and Laszlo is perhaps the other side of the coin with his hugely dangerous propaganda work. But he's much more quiet than Rick, and I think he's a bit more controlled with his emotions. I've had some very interesting chats with people in the past about Victor Laszlo. Some of them don't like his character at all. They think he's a bit of a cold fish who's more obsessed with his work than his affection for Ilsa. But I don't get that sense of him. I think he's very focused on his work, but underneath that and feeding into it is his deep love and concern for Ilsa. But I don't know, what sense do you get of Laszlo in the
that is
film?
that is a great question. I think I maybe thought of him as someone who had been through more than Rick, in the sense that he had actually survived this concentration camp stay, and somehow it hadn't broken him. Hurt him, maybe, yes, but he isn't broken. He's certainly not a broken man when we meet him. But I also felt that there is a cultural difference between the two of them that you get as well, because Rick is this cool American,
Hmm.
and Laszlo very much the sort of more quiet, controlled Eastern European kind of character.
Yeah.
Don't really show your emotions in that way. But you never doubt his feelings for his wife. And
Hmm.
then, of course, that tense moment when he finds out that she is actually in love with another man. but maybe the only way of saving her is to take her with him, you know, and leave the country. And even, you know, Rick is realizing that in the airport, you know, that he needs her to do his work.
Yeah.
And she needs to be there to support him. And although she might not actually have realized that in that moment, the two men seem to have.
Yes.
And acknowledge that fact. So no, I didn't actually see him as a kind of cold fish at all, but someone who had probably seen in a more direct way the horrors of the war than perhaps Rick had, who always finds a way of, you know, taking advantage of stuff or selling, you know, booze or something. Whereas the other one was very much someone who was deep, you know, deep in the war, in the horrors of the war. But you're right, for her part, it's a difficult choice, that one.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to choose, but yeah, you're right. But that's actually a great way of seeing the both of them, because I also wondered, I know that the film has sort of been promoted in the name of Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, but you kind of do have a third main character in Laszlo, don't you?
Yes, yes, you do. And it's funny actually when you ask people to name the main characters, it's he often gets forgotten. It's not that people forget his character, they can't remember the actor's
Yeah.
name. And poor Claude Rains, who does a really good job with Louis. I really love
Yes.
what he did with Louis. He tends to get forgotten. Although equally, I can never remember who plays Major Strasser. So
Oh my God, that's embarrassing. I should know that. He's actually rather good. I gotta give him that. He's actually really, really good in that role, because it's kind of easy to be the bully and just come in and, you know, exercise your control. But he does, you know, you do get that tension as well, because he's new to this area. So he doesn't actually know how things are done here in Casablanca. And I think you get that feeling actually from that little national anthem fight scene where the
yeah.
performance sort of gets outsung. That, you know, that you cannot just stand up here and sing the German national anthem. That, you know, you kind of have to find a way of blending in. You can be the bully, yes, but maybe it's easier, or things would be smoother for everyone if you try to actually corroborate a little bit or blend in somehow.
Yes, he's very much out of his comfort zone in Casablanca. Not that he shows it, which I think is a very clever bit of acting,
Yeah.
because there's just enough that he would find, you know, to making okay, I'm not in the Third Reich at the moment,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I'm cleverer than that. I am when I realize that things are not quite as I want them to be here, then
Yeah.
I will adapt.
True. And then I
Yeah.
guess we also have to mention Sam, don't we, Andrew? What's your
We
impression of Sam?
Poor Sam. We haven't spoken about Sam at all. His part is brilliant, and I love the fact that although it's never ever stated in the film, Rick simply couldn't do without Sam. Whenever Rick's at his lowest, Sam is always there. This
Yeah.
constant presence. And although Rick doesn't, again, he's a bit guarded emotionally, but when he finally has to part ways with Sam, I've always believed he did it in Sam's best interests.
Yeah.
And you could tell when he sells Rick's cafe to his competitor, he puts in that clause, you know, you retain Sam and you pay him the same I pay him. Because I think he knows by that point he's going to be marching off to the war he's been neglecting for so long. He doesn't want to take Sam with him, even though Sam probably would want to go. Because the two have this really incredible bond, which is clear all the way through the film. And it is interesting because in an age where the racial divide, even in a cosmopolitan place like Casablanca, particularly between two Americans, would have still been fairly sharp. Yes, Rick is the boss, but they're also quite close friends and they talk about everything. And Sam has shared Rick's fortunes and his misfortunes. And
that's a good point. That's a really, really good point. And also just at the time, seeing someone of a different skin color as an equal, you know, which he clearly does. He values his advice. He clearly couldn't have built his business without him. And the fact that he feels that friendship so deeply that he really doesn't want to have the conversation of whether or not he's going to take him with him. You know, he would rather try and protect him.
Yes, he sort of ducks it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Doesn't he? Because it's a bit of a difficult one. It's a shame because in some ways I think a final parting scene between him and Sam would have been immensely powerful.
Yes.
But it might have perhaps layered on just a bit too much emotion in a film which is already hugely emotional. So
that's true. And I think you also get a little bit of an impression about Ilsa's relationship with Sam, because there's clearly a bond there as well.
Yes.
And he's the first person to notice her walk in, of course, and he immediately gets this very worried look on his face. He keeps,
no.
you know, oh dear. And then she, of course, is the first one to ask him to play as time goes by, and he kind of reluctantly has to. But there is also a bond there that she kind of said goodbye to the moment she said goodbye to Rick.
Yes.
And that tensity is kind of well done as well. And also the fact that she is asking him to play a song that he knows he's not allowed to play. That creates that lover's tension as well, very much. And then the moment, of course, Rick comes in, he just sort of disappears with his piano there in the background. Get out of the line of shooting here.
He clearly has a good sense of self-preservation. Yes. It is a very awkward moment when Rick, I remember the first time I ever saw the film when Rick stormed over to him and said, "I thought I told you never to play that again." And you go, whoa, okay.
Okay. And he just does that sort of, look there, yeah,
wasn't me.
So true. Again, you know, mixing that humor and the seriousness of it all. That's done in such a brilliant way. Yeah. Oh, what else, Andrew? Well, there's so many things we probably haven't touched on.
Oh, well, I mean, it's kind of down to masses of favorite moments in an awesome film. I mean, just lingering with Sam a moment. I've always taken it when Rick hides the letters of transit in the piano. It's an implicit statement of his trust in Sam, because I think Sam sees him do it. And so in Rick's mind, the safest place for these precious things is with Sam. It's just another thing that underwrites how amazing their relationship is.
That's a good point.
I think if there's only one tragic thing, it's that the actor who played Sam, and again, this is terrible of me, I can't remember his name at the moment, but the fact that he couldn't actually play the piano, that's
true. Yes.
Yeah, that I was so disappointed when I learned that. And I think there's one scene where you actually see his hands and you go,
really?
Oh, yeah, he can't play the piano, because he's just kind of moving them across the keyboard in a way that's definitely not piano.
Oh, I have to notice that. I because I was about to say he does do a really convincing job, but I think you're probably right. I need to pay attention to that one.
Yeah, he could sing. He could sing really well, but it was just the piano playing that.
He had a really lovely voice, actually, but it's kind of hard to ask him to play the piano and act and sing at the same time.
I think even someone who knew what they were doing would struggle with that one. It's not easy, and to do it against the background noise of a busy film set, I think no.
That is. But they actually obviously they didn't shoot anything on the location, really. They kind of shot everything on stages and so on. But you are convinced that you are in this international melting pot of different nationalities and cultures and everything at the same time. So it did manage, those few scenes we have of like marketplaces and so on, they're very convincing.
Yes, they are. And I do like the interaction you get. They're never just backgrounds. There's that lovely bit where Ilsa's looking at the wares on one of the stalls, and you get it's another injection of humor, which I think they need. Was, oh, you're a friend of Rick's. Oh, wait. No, that's I'll just half the price. Oh, wait, you're a special friend of Rick's.
That's true. That's true. That's another brilliant one. But you do get that, even I think from at the very first scene, you kind of have this feel of, you know, there's a lot of things going on here. People are trading and shopping and all of this going on, and at the same time, that constant tension of some people might being there illegally or trying to find a way out or stuff like that. So there is a that play of, you know, everyday life goes on, and at the same time there's a lot of stuff happening in the background there. That is done brilliantly.
Yes, the interruption of the market scene when the police make their arrest. I think they shoot a man who's carrying Free French pamphlets. Yes, it's a very sharp reminder that of the impact the wider conflict is having on everyone, because it is interesting. I like the sense of the place, as you say. It does really feel like this bubbling melting pot, and also the fact that most of them, although they're aware of the conflict, like Rick, a lot of them just want to get on with it and live their lives. I've always imagined the Moroccan stallholder who does offer more favorable prices actually is probably not that bothered about things outside his sphere. He just wants to make his living. And
yes. And it's also, I think, a reminder that sometimes in extreme circumstances, a place like Casablanca suddenly gets a completely new meaning, and it becomes a place where people go to escape or something. And that's the tension, you know, in especially during warfare, that suddenly different places in Europe became places that got a completely new function or meaning to them. Like suddenly this desperation to get to Lisbon so you can move on to the States, you know. And it's a great reminder that, you know, layers of history continues, that you have an old place like Casablanca, and suddenly for a very brief period of time in history it became something else. And actually that was I think very well done as well in all of this, because you have a story between obviously three different people, so you have a very personal story, but set in this confusing bit of history where so many different things happened at the same time, and you don't know the outcome, and you didn't know the outcome when this movie was shot.
No, that's the really powerful thing. In fact, actually, it's funny because when it was released, I think the very earliest screening might have been at the very end of 1942, but general release was 1943. But you can tell that they'd sort of scripted and filmed it from the end of 41, beginning of 42, because there's all these subtle hints that people in the United States particularly need to wake up and see what's happening. And there's very subtle bits like that scene again where Rick is trying to console himself in the bottle after his first sight of Ilsa, and he says, "Oh, I bet they're asleep over there in America. They're asleep all over America." You can read that in a number of different ways.
So true. That's so true. Another brilliant line, actually. That is so true.
Yeah,
and also, and yet, you know, the ending is so patriotic in a way.
Yes,
and it's kind of I mean, if this had been done after the war, it's kind of free to do that kind of thing. But this must have been, I don't know, very bold in a way.
I think so, yes, because even in 1943, to most observers on the ground, the issue of the war was still very much in the balance. And you know, if the Axis had won, then it probably wouldn't have been a very healthy thing to have been associated with a film like Casablanca.
Probably not, you know. But you're so right. There are subtle hints all over this now that you watch in that light. And I do know that in lots of I do know here in Denmark it didn't actually premiere until 46. So not until after the war. And I'm wondering if the same might not have been the case in many other European countries. So I think a lot of countries didn't get to see it until after the war. And that must have, you know, meant a film in a very different light, I'm guessing. It must have had a kind of different meaning after the war. But it's actually a little crazy to think about that this was shot so early.
Yes, yeah, it's a film that certainly made its mark at the time. I know it left an impression with my grandparents, because when I asked them about it years ago, they couldn't actually remember a lot of the other films that they sort of could remember them, but Casablanca was very sharp in their memory,
Yeah.
and it made an impression. I think it was its message was very positive and very hopeful. And it was little things like, in a way, Rick going through this redemptive experience where he finds himself again, his principled younger self, who goes, no, actually, there's a big problem in the world. We've got to go and sort it. And Louis too, when I love the bit where he drops the Vichy water in the bin and kicks it. I was like, right, enough of this now.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful as well. That's just fantastic as well, that one. So many that this is just, scene after scene of brilliance, and there's a reason why this is a classic. There's a reason why this is now epic, and we keep returning to it.
Yeah, there is no wasted space in Casablanca. Every bit of it is so impactful, and there's so much meaning, and I think there's so much for everyone, whoever they are and what period they watch it in, as they, as you go through the film. There's only one deleted scene that I'm aware of. And actually, it would have been a bit superfluous. There was apparently a 2-minute sequence shot where, after Rick sets up the capture of Laszlo towards the end of the film, he goes down to visit Laszlo in his cell to tell him what the plan is. But I can see why they cut it, because it didn't really do anything for the script, and it wasn't really necessary. And Rick and Victor have a very matter-of-fact discussion, so it doesn't really add any extra layers of emotional importance. So I can see why it went. Good call on their part to edit that out.
But I can also see what they were going for, actually. But yes, I see, because you that was kind of maybe a bit unnecessary. But I remembered, I think this was maybe a documentary I watched years ago, about the music in Casablanca, because it's what's it called, Max Steiner again, who did Gone with the Wind and all the epic kind of thing, and he actually didn't like As Time Goes By very much. He wasn't a huge fan of that, but what he did do that was brilliant was that he incorporated it into the film score, so you get tiny little bits of it throughout the film, like a line or something of it, sort of throughout the film when Ilsa comes in or something like that. And he's also using, and I didn't notice this until maybe, I don't know, when I watched the movie like for the 5th or 6th time, that he is using hints from the different national anthem as well. So when the Germans come in, you have a tiny bit of da 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 da.
Ah, yes.
And the same with the French national anthem, and he's kind of using either the same instruments or from that you would use when playing the national anthem, or just a tiny little note from time to time that gives you either a kind of bombastic feel, the Germans are coming in, or you have a little note from Time Goes By coming in. He's actually using that brilliantly to sort of highlight, the different emotions of the scene. And I think he actually made good use of As Time Goes By, especially given that he wasn't particularly fond of the song, and didn't really want to use it.
That's really good. I mean, a tribute to his professionalism, because I think a lot of people in that position would have been tempted to just axe it and insist on a different piece of music. But and it I, for one, am very glad he kept it in and used it so well.
And I guess it wouldn't have been the same if we had just heard Sam play it. If it hadn't kind of been incorporated into any other bits of the film, it would just have been a sort of song in the film that Sam played. But you do get, I mean, I think there's a reason why it has become such a classic, because it's so associated with this movie now. And I think it's because it became the soundtrack of that movie somehow.
Yes, yes. It's funny actually, because whenever I hear that song, I think of
Yeah,
Casablanca.
yeah, there's no
You know,
way.
regardless of any other context, I go, oh yeah, Casablanca.
Oh yeah,
Play
that
it,
one,
Sam.
absolutely. You do, you do. Oh, Andrew, this has been great. Is there, are we missing something? We probably are.
We probably, I mean, Casablanca is one of those hugely dangerous films you could go on about endlessly, but I can't think of anything particularly. It's just more of the incredible lines, you know. And
Yes.
one of my favorites from Louis is when Rick's threatening him and he says, "Remember, this pistol's aimed at your heart." He just goes, "I think you'll find that's my least vulnerable spot."
That's another fantastic line, that one. And in that
Yeah.
situation, it's so fantastic. Oh, he's a wonderful character, Louis. He's a fantastic character.
He is, and there are just so many witty comebacks like that throughout the
Yes.
film. It's just brilliant. I like to think they had a good time playing it. Although
Yeah.
I know for a lot of the actors, it came at a time when they were quite busy with other projects. And
Yeah.
apparently, Bergman was always very surprised later in life by what a success it was, because at the time, she certainly didn't think it was the biggest film she was involved in. Hence all the breaks to call the people who are making For Whom the Bell Tolls. But
Really need to do something better than this.
yes, I'm going to fire my agent. Oh no, I'm not actually. It's doing rather well. Because I think it won 3 Oscars,
Yes, I
including
think
Best
you're right.
Picture for 1943.
Yes.
So they clearly did something right.
There was clearly something there. Yeah, I think you're right. It was 3, wasn't it? 3 or 4? 4? 3. 3. I think. Oh, I got to look that up.
Maybe 3. I'll have to
Comment,
check on
comment,
that.
guys. You will know.
Yeah, let us know what we
No, true. Andrew, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Sorry, I
I
had
hope
to
it's
get
a
that one.
continuation of a beautiful
I
friendship, but
had
I
to
know what
get
you
that one
mean.
off my chest. Sorry.
Do we cue the Marseillaise here as we both walk
Oh,
off into the
oh,
mist?
yes, that's what we do. That's what we do. Oh, this was fantastic. And
That was wonderful,
nice to
Jane.
do.
Thank you so much.
And thank you. I think it was really nice to do a good old Hollywood classic from the golden days of Hollywood.
Yeah.
We're doing 2 90s movies now, Andrew. We needed to go back to basic, back to the good old Hollywood.
Yes, we did. And there are so many amazing films from that era, but I personally couldn't think of a better one.
No.
So
And this was your
thank you for
choice.
doing this
This
one.
was your choice, so well done.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you. Beautiful friendships it is.
We had to do Casablanca. Absolutely, we had to. And guys, comments again. Let us know your thoughts and what did you like about this film, your favorite scene, whatever.
Yes, absolutely, guys, because of course it's not just us discussing it, even though it has been for quite a while, but please add your own thoughts, ideas. Did we miss anything? Is there a scene that really has burnt itself into your memory that we had the temerity to not even touch on? Do you have a theory about, was there a second bunch of transit papers? Oh. Does it even matter?
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yes, please. Anything, the cinematography, everything. There's so many things we haven't touched on. So please comment and let's keep this conversation going.
Absolutely. And Jane, thank you so much for today. I'm really, really looking forward to the next one. I'll see you again soon.
Likewise. And thank you so much, Andrew.